I remember very clearly on like my third or fourth week in the job, one of the vice presidents walked into the firm and she looked like a disaster. And I was like, oh my God, like, what's wrong? Are you okay? Like, I thought her dog got hit by a bus. And she was like, no, it's just been a long day. I've been listening all day. And Rick, as I remember thinking, listening, whatever, like, how hard is listening?
On today's episode of the Take Two podcast, we have someone that I am particularly excited about because there is this personal connection I have with her. For those of you that don't know, I started my career in the AmeriCorps, and now I'm dating myself a little bit, but that's where this direction of my career trajectory started to form and where I started to inquire about the intersection between both money and meaning and finding new and creative solutions, not just enhance economic opportunity in the world, but also human potential. So that was the beginning of it all for me. And now our guest today is actually someone who helped shape AmeriCorps. And she's also a Boston local, and her previous best-selling book, Limitless, is on Rick's and I's bookshelf at home. So we are big, big fans of hers, to say the least. Introducing to you today's guest on the Take Two podcast, Laura Gassner Otting, otherwise known as LGO. She is a best-selling author, one of the top executive coaches in the world, and she's also built one of the most successful search firms and then sold it as a founder. So this episode is filled with truth and honesty about her journey, and we'll be discussing her latest book, which hit shelf on April 4th, Wonderhell. And if you've ever experienced that time between achieving your most cherished goals and then coming down from that high once you've achieved those goals, you've definitely witnessed a bit of Wonderhell. Today, we'll be discussing it all with Laura. We'll be discussing why success doesn't make us feel like it should, how to deal with this thing called imposter syndrome, and how to handle the challenges that come at every single level of success. Let's take two. We always open up every conversation with a guest of what is your superpower? You know, we're really intrigued with this notion of superpowers. So I'd love for you to share with us, what do you think your superpower is that's really brought you to where you're at today?
Yeah. So I think if I have any superpower at all, and I think I probably have one and only one, it's that I am able to look at people and within fairly short form, see what makes them great. And then relay it back to them, reflect it back to them on ways that either they can see it for the first time, finally, or actually believe in it enough to do something about it. So I am able to look at people and say, you know that you think you can't do this thing, but here's what I see. Here's why I see it. And here's the data pattern that maybe you're not noticing that actually tells me that this goal that you have that you kind of talk around the edges of, and maybe you revere so much that you only whisper it and you think it's maybe for other people. Here's why I know you can do it. And in that moment, I think when somebody looks at you and they're like, you can do it. I believe in you and I'm going to help. You're like, oh, they believe in me. This person who I respect, who I look up to, who I admire, sees something in me. Maybe I can actually see it.
And where do you think that started? You know, was it something that you always had, or is it something that you developed later in life?
I definitely developed it when I became an executive search consultant, when I became a headhunter. So when I was younger, I was super awkward, very uncomfortable in my own skin. I was an uber nerd. I went to computer sleepaway camp when I was 13 years old. So Brooke, you were you were competing in beauty pageants and I was at computer sleepaway camp. So very different roles. So, I was worth my weight in Clearasil. I had braces and pre-braces. Like, it was not pretty. In fact, I was the only girl at computer sleepaway camp. And I think I still didn't kiss a boy till I went to college. So that like, paints a picture for you. And because I was so uncomfortable in my own skin, I was very defensive, very self-defensive. And I developed a hard exterior and a sarcasm because I figured if I've got a hard armor, you can't pierce me. You're not going to hurt me. If I'm like a good, first right hook, you don't have to worry about what the left hand's doing. You don't have to worry about the second punch. A good offense is the best defense. And then later, as I grew in my career and I became a recruiter, my job as a recruiter was to get to know someone else, to really see them, to understand their story, to figure out the fact pattern and who they've been and where they're going. Because we spend an hour and a half in recruiting, interviewing a candidate. We probably spend 18 hours referencing them, right? We learn all about who the person is. And you see things like, well, this person is a perfectionist. Okay, great. How does that manifest in their work? Is it other-oriented perfectionism that makes them a micromanager? Is it socially prescribed perfectionism, so they're looking for everybody else's approval? Or is it self-oriented and intrinsic motivation, which actually proves to be some of the most successful people? And so when I spent time doing that, I think that's when it developed. I remember very clearly on like my third or fourth week in the job, one of the vice presidents walked into the firm and she looked like a disaster. And I was like, oh my God, like, what's wrong? Are you okay? Like, I thought her dog got hit by a bus. And she was like, no, it's just been a long day. I've been listening all day. And Rick, as I remember thinking, listening, whatever, like, how hard is listening? And then I learned to really listen, to hear what people say, to hear what they're not saying, to watch their body language, to listen to the lilt in their voice change, the highlight in their eyes move. And once you do that, you can see like 800 times more.
It's so true. People talk and somebody says, oh, I hear you. And it's so different than like, I get you and I'm really listening to you. And I think one of the things I got out of what you were just saying is when you have that mirror up and a reflection, it's actually because you really see somebody. So you're able to recreate for them in front of them who it is that they're showing up as.
You're showing them something that they just do not know. It's not like they see that themselves. And I think that's also such a missing in life. We see ourselves a certain way. We think we know who we are, but others look at us and they see something totally differently.
So what's so interesting about that? When I was doing the research for Wonderhell, as you know, the book is organized as an amusement park, right? Like we think success is going to be fun. It's going to be amazing. And then you get there and you're like, why isn't it easier? I thought this was going to be great. Why isn't it great? It's sort of like an amusement park where you're like, this is going to be super fun. And then it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're sunburned and the corn dog in your stomach is threatening to leave your body on the roller coaster that you're stuck in line for. So I organized it as an amusement park. And in the first section, which is Imposter Town, one of the rides you go on, one of the emotions that you experience is the Hall of Mirrors. And here's what I learned about this idea of who we think we are. There's this theory that's from like the early 1900s, and it's called the looking glass theory. And the idea behind that is I'm not who I think I am, and I'm not who you think I am. I'm who I think you think I am. Right? So I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I'm who I think you think I am, which means that when we're sitting there and we're having a conversation with somebody about our hopes and our dreams and our goals, if we're talking to people who we think deep down maybe don't think that we're capable, we're not going to think that we're capable no matter what they're saying. So, for me, like when I tell my parents I'm dropping out of law school and joining the Clinton campaign, they think, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever because she can't put her socks away either. They don't know me as this person and what I'm capable of doing. And so there are lots of people in our lives who have been there forever. Some of them still belong and some of them, maybe they don't. And so I think it's really important that we're having that conversation with somebody and hoping that they see us and they get us and not just hear us, right? They see us and they understand us and they reflect back on us that we're choosing the right people to have these conversations with.
Yeah, it's good. And, I think this thing around imposter syndrome is really interesting because I've kind of dealt with this a lot. When you reference the beauty pageants, gosh, when I entered into a beauty pageant, Laura, it was like, I did not belong at all. I didn't go to the coaches. I didn't do the walking classes. I didn't do the interview classes. It was like, and to actually get through the first one that I did at the state level in Massachusetts, it was like, I actually had to fake it until I made it. I think I became like the ultimate imposter. And when you talk about this, the interesting thing is there was this point, and I have no idea where it happened, and maybe you can give some insight into this, where it just shifted, where like I became so used by it that I was no longer an imposter, but it was like who I was. And so then when I showed up the next year, it was like, Brooke, the girl that was going to win the pageant, showed up and she won the pageant. But there was a clear point, I think, where something shifted from imposter syndrome to this is me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is like you can talk about the alter ego effect, that Todd Herman writes about. Beyonce gets on stage and she's Beyonce, right? She just has a different persona, right? Like you think about Lady Gaga, you think about Madonna, Cher, anybody with the like one word name. They get on stage and they pretend to be somebody else. My name is Laura Gassner Otting, but when I get on stage, I'm LGO, right? Like I put on the show. And you know, when my last book, Limitless, is yellow, and I get on stage and head to toe yellow. And here's the thing. You can't play small in head to toe yellow, probably in the same way that you can't play small in an evening gown, right? With the tiara on your head. Like you just can't do it. I don't know if it's faking it till you make it as much as it's sort of borrowing confidence from a personality or from the outfit that you're wearing. The first time I got on stage after the pandemic, I spoke to 5,000 people in Dallas, and I was wearing head to toe yellow, and I was going to tell a story about how I was so sick in 2021 that I didn't even know if I was going to see 2022. And I strode out on stage wearing head to toe yellow for the very first time, knowing I was going to tell this story, and I was terrified. But I walked out on stage and the crowd roared, seeing me like strut out there in all yellow. And because they had confidence, like I looked like I had confidence, so that they had confidence back, so that I gave them confidence in return, and then they gave more to me. So I didn't have to be brave for 60 minutes. Like you didn't have to be brave for the entirety of the pageant. You just had to be brave for the first 60 seconds, long enough to like find your footing as Brooke, the pageant queen. And then once you were in that footing, there's no stopping you.
This was your first book, and it was amazing. And now you're coming up with a new book. Is it a progression? Was it something new ideas?
Yeah, it is. So in Limitless, I talk about this idea of why success doesn't equal happiness. And that comes from 20 years in executive search, where I was called, it was my job to call the most successful people in the world. I would call them because of all the success, trying to recruit them away, of course, on behalf of my clients. But despite all that success, they weren't very happy, which is why they all called me back. And I was fascinated by this idea of like these people who are successful. And mind you, I was doing this executive search for nonprofits, universities, government organizations, advocacy organizations, service organizations, Teach for America, where I know Brooke served. So these are C-suite executives and organizations of purpose. And I was like, well, if they're bold-faced names and bold-faced organizations and they have purpose and they're still calling me back, something's wrong. And so the first book, Limitless, really talks about how it's not success we should be going after, but consonance, this idea of alignment and flow when what we do matches who we are. It's not bigger, better, faster, more. It's how much calling do you need? How much is the work connected to that calling? How much contribution is it bringing into your personal life? And how much control do you have over it? And everybody at every age and every stage needs different amounts of each of these in their life. So that's sort of what Limitless talks about. I'm trying to help people define success for themselves. So there I am. I publish Limitless, and it ends up dropping as a Washington Post bestseller, #2 behind Michelle Obama, Good Morning America's favorite book of the year. And I was like, that's so cool. I only thought 3 people would buy this book: my mother, my father, and maybe my sister used from my dad. Suddenly it's successful. And I'm like, oh, this means something to me. And so when you suddenly find success in a thing that's actually meaningful to you, success you actually care about, you find yourself in this spot where, again, you thought it was going to be easy. I made it. Successful bestseller, easy money, everything's good. But it wasn't an end point. For me, it became a waypoint. Like, oh, shoot, I had this success. And inside of this success, I now see a version of myself that could be even different, even more meaningful to me. And I didn't know what to do with it. It was amazing. It was exciting. It was wonderful, but it was also anxiety provoking. It was stressful. It was identity shaking. The burden of my potential sat on my shoulders and was like, hey, Laura, what you got for me? Are you going to live into this newfound you that you didn't even know existed last week, last month, last year? And you're going to let it pass you by? And I had to make a choice. It was wonderful, and it was hell. It was Wonderhell. And so I went about trying to figure out a way out of Wonderhell. I'm like, I got to get out of this. I crushed it. I leaned in. I 10x'd. I washed my face. I stopped apologizing. Like, you name it. If there was like a best-selling self-help book, I read it and I failed at it. Because it turns out that there isn't a way out of Wonderhell. We just have to get used to being in it, because on the other side of this Wonderhell, when you figure out what you're made of, is the next success and the next Wonderhell and the next one and the next one and the next one after that. So I wrote this book talking to 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic gold medalists, startup unicorns, and then everyday people like us who found themselves in this moment where they had to make a decision about who they were yesterday and who they're going to become tomorrow. And the book tells the stories that I learned from all these people about not how to survive in these moments, but how to actually get excited about them and plan for them and learn from them and enjoy them and actually thrive in these moments.
You also said that you became an accidental entrepreneur. I love that. So, and I'd love to get a bit of an insight into that, and then to understand, when you build something up, why do you sell it?
Yeah. So, I mean, Rick, as you can probably relate to this story, I was sitting at this big executive search firm, the marquee firm in the country and the world that does specifically mission-driven search. And I knew I was going to make my numbers. I was so excited. I was sitting across the way from my clients, and I was sort of my gaze went from them and their problem out, looking out over my beautiful corner office, the Boston Commons, the garden. And I was like, this is so cool. I'm going to make my numbers. I'm going to crush it. I'm going to get the promotion. Awesome. And then I didn't make my numbers because I didn't sell the search to my clients because they could tell. My mind went from their problem, which is, solving the big problems in the world, curing cancer, feeding the poor, climate change, et cetera, to my problem. I need to make my numbers. Because it turns out that my boss's definition of success was the fat bottom line, whereas my client's definition of success was finding the best talent to help them get there. And in that moment, I realized that I was not limitless, right? I was not in consonance. I was not doing the thing that I actually cared most about. And so I walked into my boss's office and I was like, there's a better way. And he was like, there is the door.
And there she went to their box.
And so I had this moment. He was like, look, you're great. We love you. You can stay. You do good work, but you have to do it our way. And I realized that if I did it his way, I wasn't part of the solution for my clients, which left me in only one place, which is that I was part of the problem for my clients. And so, I took my little manifesto and my fish like Jerry Maguire and out I went. And so I started my own firm, mostly because once I realized I wasn't solving the problem, I couldn't remain there and not be part of the solution.
You say I could relate to that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah. You what needs to be done, and you suddenly realize that that's what we're doing is just not the right thing to do anymore. So you go looking and you keep pursuing that different way of doing things. So that's amazing. So you build up this really successful firm, and then you sold it.
And then I sold it. Yes. So I ran it for 15 years, and then I sold it to the women who helped me build it. And I am probably, of the things I'm proudest of in my life, that would probably rank sort of in the top 5, mostly because selling a founder-based firm means that you have to build an institution and not a cathedral, right? And I think a lot of founders build cathedrals to who they are. I never put my name on the door. That was intentional at the beginning, but it wasn't because I wanted to build an institution. It was because if I was like, Laura Gassner, Otting and search company, people would be like, who? Right? So I had to give it a name that it just wasn't. I learned a real big lesson. When I'm Laura from the White House, everyone takes my calls. When I'm Laura from, insert search firm here, everyone's like, what, who? We'll call you back. So I wanted to make sure that I was the Wizard of Oz. I was looking bigger than I was in the beginning with the search firm. But it turned out that was accidentally a good idea because I could then sell the firm to my team. At the 10-year mark, I was pitching a search. And I hate to tell the story because it doesn't make me look really good, but I do tell the story in the book, so I'm just gonna rip off the Band-Aid and tell it to the public for the first time right now. I was giving a pitch to a scion of Wall Street. I mean, this guy was like Gordon Gekko. You go up to his giant penthouse office and he's got this table that's as big as a pool table as his desk, and he's looking out over all of Central Park, and he's having this meeting with you where he's watching the market the entire time and on his Bloomberg, and he's barely looking at you, and there's 10 lawyers around the table. And he's like, I need you to find somebody to start my family foundation. And I was like, great. Awesome. And he goes, so, I mean, I'm getting a little older, so maybe we should give some money to hospitals so I can get some good care. And my kids are getting a little older. We want to get them to college. So maybe we should give some money to colleges also so that they get in. So can you find me somebody to run that family foundation? And I literally stood up and I was like, no. Thank you for your time today. You have 10 lawyers around this table who can just write those checks for you. It's been really nice to meet you. We'll show ourselves out. And literally all 10 lawyers didn't breathe. And then he looked at me. He looked away from the Bloomberg. He's like, well, what would you do? And I was like, well, in the extensive research that we did, we've noticed that you have hockey rinks in all of your homes, by the way, even in the Caribbean. So clearly we're not giving money to the environment, right? So you've got outdoor hockey rinks. So clearly you care about kids' sports and you seem to really value your privacy because in our extensive research, we didn't find a great deal about you personally. So maybe instead of hospitals and universities, you could start the, I don't know, the foremost program on youth concussive injuries caused by sports. How about that? And he looks at me and goes, that's a great idea. All the lawyers exhale. Go find me that person. And I said, well, perhaps maybe what we'll do is we'll find you somebody to spend more than 7 minutes here talking to you about what you want your legacy to be. And then they'll help you create a philanthropic program. And he was like, great. And all the lawyers were excited. And we walked out and we went down the elevator. And I texted my partner and I went, I just totally bullshitted my way through a meeting where the extensive research I did on the dude was on the elevator on the way up to the penthouse. That was maybe malpractice. At best, it was super irresponsible for sure. And it really could have screwed us massively. And I didn't know it then, but I know it now. Whitney Johnson calls this the S curve, where at the beginning you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. This is so hard. And then you hit like a stride and you're like, cool, I'm doing all right. I'm hitting my stride. Everything's good. I know what I'm doing. And then you get to the top of the S and you're like, okay, now I'm just kind of mailing it in. And what happens is when we're mailing it in like that, doing our extensive research in the elevator, we're actually self-sabotaging. And what I didn't realize until that moment was that I had been doing that for a little bit of time. And now I know 7 years later, having done this research for Wonderhell, that had I kept going on that path, I not only would have ruined my career and my reputation, I would have ruined the firm. I would have ruined the 30 women who worked for me. I mean, that could have been pretty cataclysmic for a lot of people, especially the organizations who are investing in me and entrusting me to help them find the leadership that's going to help them change the world. And so I knew in that moment, I was like, I think maybe I should go. In 5 years, I'll be 45. I'll have been running this company for 15 years. I'll have been doing search for 20 years. Maybe we should think about an exit plan. So that's what started my leaving.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's such a great story. And I can actually relate to that. I can remember, you're doing all these quarterly calls with analysts and investors. And
yes,
after like number 10, it's like you don't even prepare for them because you kind of know the numbers. And the worst thing is you actually know what they want to hear. And you kind of lose what it is you want to create. And you lose yourself in that process.
Yeah, and not only do you lose yourself, I mean, you lose the joy, you lose the energy. I mean, there was a moment at the beginning of when I was doing the work that I would go in and I would talk to potential clients about what we did. And they were like, you seem like you have the best job in the world. And I'm like, I do. I love what I do. I love my team. We are amazing. And that confidence in what I did was so contagious. I couldn't wait to sign on the bottom line. Then later you're like, well, here's what we do and here's what you want to hear. And, I was talking to a friend about this when I was trying to figure out how to structure the exit for my company. And I said, his name was Matt. And I was like, Matt, I just think I'm sick of pitching. And he said, no, you're actually sick of winning. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting because I knew what they wanted to hear. So I just gave it to them. And here's the problem. I think in doing that, I also, to go back to what we were saying earlier, I stopped seeing them. I stopped really listening. And so I would pitch the thing we were brought in to pitch, but I didn't see all the other opportunities that might have been out there for me as well. And so I think even though we were doing well, the funnel got narrower along the way. So it was both less fun and less exciting. It was probably also less lucrative.
Yeah. Is that the beginner's mindset that you talk about as well?
Yes. So in the very last chapter is the beginner's mindset, where I talk about both going on autopilot and also how do you continue to, when you realize you're at the top of that S curve, how do you figure out when it's time to leap to the next one? And even as important, how do you figure out how to pack everybody else's backpack with you so that you're not leaping alone? So it took me 5 years to exit that company. And the first couple of years of it were me convincing my business partner that I was actually leaving, right? She didn't believe me at first. She was like, how are you going to do this? Who are you going to be when you're no longer LGO CEO? Like, you've been doing search forever. You're a professional Jewish mother, right? Like, you get paid to like ask personal questions and to fix people up and to be all nosy. She's like, how are you? Like, this is who you are in your core. And I was like, I know, but I'm really leaving. And then on the third year, it was like, listen, I'm really leaving. Like, we need a plan, because like I'm either leaving without a plan or I'm leaving with the plan. Like, this is your choice. And she sort of had to go through all of the all the waves of grief, right? Like she was in denial, and then she was negotiating, and then she was mad at me, and then she was, all the things that you could be. So it really did take 5 full years, but we had to think about, how do I make sure that everybody who was left behind doesn't feel left behind, but actually realizes that now they are out in front and this is their platform and they can take it. And in fact, the firm has thrived since I've left. I should have left earlier.
I got to ask this. One of the things you said is you had to make sure everybody didn't feel left behind, right? And I'm sure that there are people that have gone through this, that have exited companies or have left organizations, and they don't want their people that they care so much about to be left behind. What did you do? What actions did you take to ensure that that didn't happen?
Yeah. So as we are leaders, the closer you get to the center, the seat at the head of the table, the more you're expected to talk, the more you're expected to have the answers, the more you're expected to lead the ship. And so I very intentionally kept moving myself back to the center of the table again, and, metaphorically and also literally. And every time we would walk into a client pitch, I'd be like, have you met Allison? Have you met Tracy? Have you met Catherine? And I would take my spotlight and I would reflect it on them. Like, the moon isn't actually bright. There's no light in the moon. It's just a giant rock out there. But the only reason that the moon is bright is because the sun reflects on it. So I would see my role as being in the spotlight, as being the one who would actually use that spotlight to deflect on my team. So I very intentionally tried to talk less. I tried to, be at the center of the table. I tried to be the one immediately with the answer. When somebody came through with a problem, rather than solving their problem, I would say, what do you need? What does success look like for you in this? Where are you challenged? Rather than just I know what the answer is. I know what the problem is. I've been doing this for donkey's years at this point. But they need to know that they can come up with a solution themselves. So I had to work very hard to make sure that they weren't leaning on me, but they were actually seeing that they themselves could do it. And so it did take a little bit of time and a little bit of patience and to make sure that they did it. The other thing that happened is that the market that we were in shifted. When we first started doing this work, we did it very intentionally in a completely different way than executive search had ever been offered before in the nonprofit sector. It's usually 1/3 of the first year's cash compensation. And we were like, well, that seems wrong, because if we're doing a search for the Kellogg Foundation and that search pays $300,000 and our fee is $100,000. But if we're doing a search for a local Teach for America organization and that organization is going to pay $90,000, then our fee is $30,000. Do I want to incentivize my people to go after the $100,000 fee or the $30,000 fee? Well, probably the $100,000 fee. But to which organization is that money going to mean more? Is that search going to mean more? And frankly, is it going to be harder to do? And so we needed to figure out a way to level the playing field between the two of them so that my team was incentivized to pay the same amount of attention to all searches. And so we created that model. After 10 years of doing it, not only was that model proven, that model was working, we didn't have to walk in and say, there's a better way. We would walk in and the potential client would say, so you're doing search in this way. We want to know why we should hire you and not the 4 other people who are also coming in now offering search in that way. So we had spawned a lot of competitors because what we were doing was working. And when they weren't offering it, clients were asking them for it. So my job in the beginning was to be the moxie-driven, outspoken, iconoclastic, there's a better way. I didn't have to do that anymore. I kind of worked myself out of a job. My business partner who came in on year 3 or 4, she was the one who made sure that everything that I promised in this bombastic way in these meetings actually happened. Her job was quality and, making sure it was done to the highest of standards. They didn't need me anymore. They didn't need me because the work was, the people were already convinced of our way. They just needed somebody to come in and say, we got you. We got you. And so I had to help them understand how unnecessary I was, that the firm didn't need my type of leadership anymore. It needed her and their type of leadership at this point.
And, something that I wonder if because I think about it quite often now is, what advice would you give yourself when you were 18 years old? Now that you know what you've learned, what is it that you would tell yourself?
Yeah, well, I'd probably tell myself not to eat that brownie at the Grateful Dead concert. It's probably the first thing. Some of the other brownies good, but that one particular brownie in Kansas City, I don't know about that one. That one was not so good. Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. If I were giving myself advice, my 18-year-old self, who was listening to a podcast that was recorded over the internet that I'm listening to on my cell phone, my 18-year-old self would be like, what? We're just trying to like play a record, like till the DJ shuts up so I can get my jam on my mixtape, right? Even if I knew who I was when I was 18, which by the way, I didn't, but even let's just say I did, the world around us has changed so much that it wouldn't even matter. So I think the advice I would give to my 18-year-old self is like, you don't know anything. And that's okay because nobody around you knows anything either. And you're all going to figure it out.
That is so good because that is exactly, when you're 18, you think you know everything, and you think that you should know everything, and that's so right. If you can just get yourself to the point where just enjoy life, just be at the beginner mindset, just take in what's there, see what you can do, and trust yourself, trust that you can get stuff done.
Could you imagine if we were all walking around now at the age we're at right now with only what we knew when we were 18? Could you imagine? Oh my God. But I would eat a lot. I'd still be eating a lot of Hot Pockets, pizza rolls, and those
Ramen noodles.
Ramen noodles for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I have an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I sometimes look at them and they're so full of vim and vigor and confidence, and they want to take over the world. And I think that's so great. So like, I would like to hold on to a little bit of the ignorance of being 18 in that way, but also knowing that armor that I put out, that shell, that sarcasm, that was stopping me from so much, so many relationships, so many adventures, so many failures from which I would learn, right? Like at 18, you think failure's finale, you think you're done. Now at 52, I know failure's fulcrum. It's the place where you learn and you grow and you iterate and you change. And I'm so like the cocktail party stories that I tell are never about like my great success. They're about the time when I ate that brownie at that, Kansas City Grateful Dead concert. Like they are about the failures and the face plants. And that's what makes us all so awesome, is that we are just the sum of all of those stories. Yes, the successes, but definitely the failures.
Absolutely. I love the failures and face plans because it's definitely, those are the ones that for me, it's like there's moments where you really have to stop and disrupt something and rethink your life,
Yes.
So there's really so much value in those moments. And one of the things that I'd like to chat through is in Wonderhell, you talk about luck, right? How
Yes.
you really make your own luck through manifestation and hard work. And, I grew up at this time where my dad used to say, the Bibeaults have shit luck or no luck. And it was like, that was it. And I lived into this future of like, I have no luck. And then I got a little bit older and I was like, oh, it's all about timing and luck. And now, I'm really at this place where I'm like, actually, it's all the practice and actions every single day that give the luck when the momentum is there and the opportunity comes forward. So what do you mean when you talk about luck through manifestation and hard work?
Yeah. So there's two parts of that chapter, and this is the ride, the fortune teller, right? Which is like, I think super, super fun. I thought that some people magically go through life like #blessed, like everything's great. It turns out that you can make your own luck. Like, are some people luckier than others? Maybe, but it's not that some people are lucky and some people are not. Some people actively do things that make them lucky. So what does that mean? They say yes more often. They believe that things are going to work out. They're more open to possibility and opportunity. They are more outgoing. They're more extroverted. And so when they're doing those things, they're actually putting themselves in the deal flow. They're top of mind. If I'm at an event and I run into somebody and they just had a conversation with somebody else about a potential job opening and they know that I'm interested, they're going to tell me. I wouldn't have learned about that otherwise. So did I get lucky to run into them? No. I intentionally went to that thing. And now, if you're an introvert and you're listening to this, don't worry, I'm an introvert too. Like I can feel you twitching. I'm twitching just saying it. You don't have to be an extrovert. What I'm saying is you can be a situational extrovert. So just ask yourself, does it make sense for me to say yes to some things, to believe things are going to work out, to go with an open mind? And when you do those things, you'll put yourself in the position where you can stand in the corner and have that conversation with one really important person, right? That's fine. That's what I do. But you can't do it if you're sitting at home in your house. It just doesn't work the same way. So that's luck, and we can all make ourselves luckier. The second is manifestation. You hear people all the time talking about, I manifested a trip to Japan. No, you didn't.
Like, voila.
You did not make that up. La, I just can manifest things. No, the science behind manifestation is fascinating. Our brains take in something like 11 million bits of data every single second. Every single second, 11 million bits of data. And it's not just like the five senses, right? The taste and smell and touch, like proprioception, where you are in your body, thermioception, how warm or cold it is in the room. There are 53 different senses. So we've got a ton of data coming in every single moment. But our brains can only process 50 bits of data a second, which means that if you want to go to Japan, but you haven't really been intentional about wanting to go to Japan, like you didn't write it on your vision board in your scrolly font, it's not that writing it on the vision board manifests it happening. It just tells your brain, oh, of the 50 bits of, or of the 11 million bits of information, these are the 50 you should look for. So when the bus passes you by, that's like Japan Airlines, 70% off flights to Japan. You're not like, I manifested that. No, you've just told your brain to notice the bus that's probably been driving past you on your commute to work every day for the last 3 months.
Oh, that's so good. It's like that. I don't know if you've heard that saying when somebody tells you something about like, oh, I've got this yellow Ferrari. Now suddenly you start to see yellow Ferraris everywhere because you're so present to it.
Yes. I remember when I was first pregnant with my oldest kid, I used to take the subway to work every single day. I never saw babies on that subway. And then the very first moment after I took that pregnancy test, I was like, where do these babies come from? Like there's literally like 17 babies in this car. There are babies everywhere. And like ugly babies too. I was like, I hope I don't have an ugly baby. Oh no, right? Like you just start noticing babies everywhere. But I hadn't thought about them, and it wasn't because they weren't there. Like the God didn't just drop a bunch of babies and a blood ugly. Like that was my worry. Like, oh my God, what if I have an ugly baby? I had a beautiful baby, but still, I was like, I don't know. So we start noticing those things everywhere, and I think that's also, when we have those friends we talked about earlier who are like, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you're not capable. In the same way that we have that in our brain, we start noticing the ugly babies. If I was like, I hope I have a beautiful baby, I'd probably see beautiful babies everywhere. So everything that we have inside of our head and everything that we write down and how we are intentional in the conversations that we have and the people we choose to have around us, all of that leads into the things that we're quote unquote manifesting, because we're just training our brain what to see and what to hear and what to feel and what to smell. And that allows us to then become luckier by believing that good things are going to happen and putting ourselves in the right places.
If we could change one thing in the world, so it's like, I imagine a world where, and you complete the sentence.
I would love to imagine a world where we don't just love people, but we truly see people. I think there is a very, very, very big, gaping distance, biblical gap between loving someone and seeing them. Like you love somebody because, they're in your life, they're related to you. Maybe they're your kids and they do the dishes and they're kind to the neighbors and they get good grades. And you're like, I love you, right? And it feels transactional, but seeing them, like allowing them to fly their freak flag and be fully who they are and loving them for that person also, I think that would change the world.
I think that's beautiful. And it goes back to what you were saying also about your superpower. So we've come full circle. Well, thank you so much, Laura. We appreciate your time. It was so great to get to know you a bit better, and really, really excited to get my hands on Wonderhell.
I'm excited for you to get your hands on it too. I'm excited for the world to get their hands on it. I can't wait to see people standing at the departure board with it in their hand for their flight reading. It'll be great. Thank you so much. This was great fun.
Thanks, Laura.
A big thank you to Laura for being on today's show. And thank you guys so much for listening in again on the Take Two podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Wonderhell and to follow Laura Gassner Otting on social. I'm going to be including all this information in the show notes below. If you like today's conversation, please leave us a review and be sure to follow us and subscribe, because every second Tuesday, we'll be dropping our latest episodes and we'll be featuring incredible leaders and authors and speakers and celebrities and athletes from all around the world. Thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.